Welcome to the Non-Essential Podcast. I'm Steve Gibson.
And I'm Dan Tuna. We're talking about truck nuts today. It's an official truck nut podcast. Wouldn't that be a better show?
Yeah, it would, especially since I'm not a car person or a truck. Even though I drive a pickup truck, I don't know shit about it. Be like, yeah.
Well, we got a show for you. We got Dr. Truck Nut.
What you need in a truck, you need one of them trucks that's got four wheels, the big ones.
No, you need one of them trucks that's got four nuts.
Four nuts.
Those are fun. Early 2000s, those were the days when everybody had them and they thought it was the most clever shit ever.
I live in a town that they still have them everywhere.
I feel like if you have that shit, you're going to get like a half-full soda cup at least thrown at your truck window now. Where I'm at, you don't see too many. Like, we definitely have some fucking hicks, but they have standards.
Those are mostly the like transient Bigfoot hunters, I imagine.
So yeah, that's what the truck nuts are for. It lures them. Yeah, I'm Ben Matlock. Welcome to the show. This week we have stuff.
Yeah.
I did some things yesterday to my body.
I know. I was gonna call you Ben Moonrune Matlock, but
yeah, I got inked up. I got stabbed a bunch. It was fun.
Yeah, I'm a little. I would say jealous is the wrong word because I've never really like wanted a tattoo. I don't have anything against them, but I just have never had anything that I've really wanted.
I've wanted to my body for 10 years, but I didn't know which one.
That's what my wife has one, and she wants another, and she really wants me to get one too. And it's like,
you should just.
But if I did, it would be something like you got, like a rune or a symbol from something like Bloodborne, especially Bloodborne. That game is fantastic.
Yeah. And there's so many like unique shapes from that game and stuff that leads to like cool art. And like I was talking to the artist as he was doing it, and he doesn't know anything about video games. I tell him what it is. It's complete gibberish to him. But like he could still be like, yeah, but it looks cool, And that's kind of a neat thing about video games now is like there's so much cool art just shoved into him that anybody can kind of appreciate it.
Happy it wasn't like you weren't picking something out that like it means peace and joy in Japanese, and it really means like turd shoe. But
that would be funny. I'm gonna get turd shoe in Japanese on my back, my entire back. But yeah, it was it was weird. I went in kind of expecting it to hurt way more than I rationally knew it would. That way, when it finally started happening, it was like, oh, that's not so bad. Like, I was just expecting, like, the worst pain ever, and it was, like, completely...
So next you can get one of those little eyeball tattoos.
Yeah, right. Just shove that needle right into my fucking eyeball, please. But yeah, so I thought a fun thing to do to commemorate this bold step in my life.
This momentous occasion, yes.
Just a little tattoo history, a little bit of trivia. No long story here. This is all kind of detached and random, but these were just some interesting facts I learned as I was doing my due diligence about
tattoo facts.
Facts. So in ancient Egypt, most tattoos were reserved for women. This led to a lot of early male archaeologists and excavators who would find mummies and they would dismiss the tattoos as signs of these were women of dubious status, so like prostitutes.
Well, obviously, if you have a tattoo, you're a sex worker, and then as we know from like current day, sex workers aren't real people. Or something.
They're bad people, which is not true, and also they were wrong because a lot of these mummies were found in areas associated with royal and elite burials, but they still just were like, well, that can't be right.
That was the court whore. Yeah.
I would know. Like, and they found one woman who, like, they knew right away was, like, a high priestess. And they were still just like, yeah, but most women, like, if they had tattoos, they were fucked up. This
was a pretty woman of ancient Egypt, Obviously, some guy came and took her off the streets and made her a high priestess.
Like, we're in a weird time, especially today. We won't get into current events here, but like, we're in a weird time, especially in America, where like there's kind of an interesting gender discussion going on. And it really, in the context of history, it's very interesting. Like, how much shit are we taking for granted because it was written by men who just like had a certainty about women from times they weren't even a part of.
Right. And I mean, it goes far beyond that. That happens a lot. And I'm like a staunch defender of science. Like anything that's anti-science pisses me off because it's science. But that said, science is sometimes wrong because science is often biased. You know, we're viewing it through
everything is interpretation. You know, everything is coming from a perspective, and you're hoping that whatever prejudices and something like all the baggage that a human being automatically carries with him with an opinion, you're hoping that not too much of that seeps into whatever they're trying to communicate.
But it still does, especially, you know, with Egyptian science and study, because a lot of people don't realize, like, a lot of that work was done in the 1800s.
Right.
And then it's built off of, but when you're building off of it for a long, long time, for over 100 years, the new science would just work off the assumptions of the original scientists.
Yeah.
Because that's how it goes.
So, you know, we started getting into, as you know, I'd like to think we got more mature as far as historians go. They started to see that these tattoos that were on women often had to do with like a sort of spiritual protection for childbirth. So like they would do like these elaborate like tattooed dots on the women's abdomen, that as the pregnancy goes on, those dots would spread out and the patterns would, you know, kind of grow. It was
now my interpretation is like they could see, you know how you can see a woman's belly move as the baby moves inside. They're probably like, stab it. It's unnatural.
I'm just thinking how great it would be if just like you made a picture of like an elephant and it got bigger and bigger. But yeah, you know, their hunch was probably right. No high class woman ever gave birth to a kid.
Right.
Certainly not in Egypt where birth control was king.
Yeah, they just bought their children.
Right. In ancient China, there were evidence of tattoos around 1200 BC, but somewhere around the Han Dynasty, which was to 202 BC to 220 AD, it seemed like only criminals got tattoos. This would actually, like many, many centuries later, France would also do a similar thing where they would stop branding criminals and just ink them.
That's what I was about to ask. Was it the criminals getting... Because that seems like a terrible plan for getting away with crime. Like, yeah, us criminals all wear tattoos. Shit, how'd we get busted?
No, it was really interesting because, like, tattooing, it seemed to, like, always be an ongoing thing for so many societies at the same time, even though those societies had sometimes no interaction. So, like, just humans were just naturally cutting themselves up and shoving shit into the cuts. But like when it came to like marking criminals or whatever, it was kind of interesting that like they saw it as like for them it was just marking them, and criminals fucking hated it because like they were oftentimes very religious societies, so they would see it as an impurity or some shit.
Which is funny when it's like crime is okay, but being impure to my body, nope.
Well, the idea was like, I can never repent because you guys fucking marked me and fucked up the temple that is my glorious criminal body.
Cut off the flap of skin, I guess. But
well, we'll talk about that. That's my last. That's my last little talking.
Sorry,
point.
I didn't mean to get ahead of ourselves here.
Well, it's a good cliffhanger as I get into a little more stuff here, like the Maori, famous, kind of warrior culture they had there. And for them, like, tattoos were a huge part of it. So you see, like, we got tribal tattoos and shit all the time now. But these guys, it was really important. Like, the tattoos displayed an individual's rank, their status, their ancestry, and, like, what they were good at. It was like walking around with a permanent ID on them. And that ID required the tattoo to be designed by carving into flesh with a sharp bone chisel and then shoving soup-based pigment into the wound. Nice. So, if you're ever worried about tattoos hurting, they don't hurt like that. So,
and I imagine they had like a infection percent somewhere around like 99.8.
Oh yeah, and they would just shove more leaves into the cut or some shit. But that's not the only instance of tattoos kind of being IDs for different cultures. Native Americans, around the time settlers started showing up and interacting with them, they would often draw pictures of their tattoos in lieu of signing their names if they didn't know any English. Drunken sailors would often rely on tattoos to prove their identity because they were fucking drunk and sailors and they couldn't keep track of physical documents.
I love the idea that instead of like, you always have seen like, oh, I don't remember my name. Maybe it's on my like underwear tag, which is weird to me. I don't write my name in my underwear. But like instead, like tattooing your name to you. I know that's not what they did, but yeah, but be like, so who are you, sailor? Be like, let me check my forearm. I'm James.
Yeah, I'm from Bermuda. Like that. That's the interesting thing is a lot of nautical tattoos all have like a meaning. And now, it's that thing where everybody gets kind of everything tattooed on them these days. And
it just kind of tends to be whatever speaks to the individual or whatever just looks cool to the individual.
Right. But you could get an anchor and that would mean one thing, or you could get something else, sea related. And like I said, that would mean you just sailed back from some place. And everybody who was a sailor or knew anything about that life would know who you were and where you've been based off of what you had tattooed on you. Probably the most noteworthy use of tattoo identification, this is a fucking great idea, I hope this comes back, in 1936, with the invention of Social Security numbers, many people went to parlors to get the digits permanently placed on them.
It's a good idea, especially in today's society.
Right. It's like, who was that, like... Because I feel like in those days, you had to like memorize so many more numbers than we do now, because everything's like on our phones and shit. But like for them, it was like, fuck, one more number? I can't do it. Just put it on my hand.
Tattoo it, just, go ahead. I'm sick of writing it in permanent ink and it washing off after a few days. Just tattoo that baby right. Well, it's funny to me, though, because now, and again, it could be my area, but I don't think so. I think it's still most people. But, they just loathe the idea of being trackable by anything.
Yeah.
And, that would be Mark of the Beast. No way, I'm going to do that. Blah, blah, blah.
But these fuckers would have, like, been all in on, like, the Hitman barcode on the back of the head. Yeah. Or whatever. Because it's like, oh, great. They can just scan me? Awesome. Maybe that's the life. Because every, like, dystopian future movie or, like... It's always like one dude, the hero, always having the problem with like the police state or whatever. But maybe your life's just way more convenient if you're just full of chips and just
you don't have to make decisions. They just tell you what to do and when.
Right. Wouldn't it be great if we weren't human?
You just gave me a great idea, though. If I ever get a tattoo, I might do the Hitman barcode, but I'll make sure to like go to the store and pick like the weirdest possible product and copy that exact barcode. So people are like, oh, Hitman barcode. But if you ever scan it, it pops up for like wet wipes or something.
This means I am Tillamook medium cheddar for $4.99.
Ooh, Steve's on sale today.
Thomas Edison actually invented the electric pen that ended up kind of leading to the modern tattoo pen. He was trying to reproduce handwritten manuscripts and accidentally ended up tattooing himself a little bit because he's a dumbass. No.
Did he actually invent it, or did he steal it from another inventor and just patent it?
Well, he made this writing device, and then somebody like ripped that off.
Oh, well, good.
And made
payback.
Yeah, like so he wasn't trying to make tattoos. He was like, "Oh fuck, the ink isn't coming off." And somebody else was like, "That sounds pretty nice."
I like to think of him as like sitting around in a pub or a coffee house, and he's talking to a fellow gent, and he's like, "Oh, you'll never believe what happened yesterday. I accidentally wrote on myself, and it won't come off. It's permanent. This stupid device." And the other guy's like, "Yes, stupid device. I've got to go. I left the oven on. Where's the patent office at, by the way?"
Permanent skinning, okay? That's a hot market. So another fun use for tattoos, soldiers would often get tattoos of naked women, basically for permanent portable porn.
Well, yeah. I mean, your forearm's right there as you're going at it, so why not?
I feel like that's like way too close to paying attention to the automatic shame at work. Like,
right. That'd be like watching your face in the mirror while you... yeah.
Yeah.
No thanks.
I don't need to know who I am in that moment. I'm way more concerned with the other party. So, and then the Navy banned it, and this led to some early cases of trying to cover up tattoos.
Yeah, you put like a bikini on her, and then it's like, there, we're good.
Well, then it's like, well, she's still hot. I gotta cover her up completely. You just paint over her, make her like a loaf of bread.
Give her a beard.
Do something. This hot pinup model is now Santa Claus.
I know they used to do the pinups on like the side of tanks and like planes too. I wonder how many soldiers got caught just like going at it on the airstrip. Like,
it's like Metal Gear Solid guards when you drop a porn magazine in those games. They're just like, oh my god,
a dead body, a porno mag.
I gotta drop everything I'm doing now. So one president was sure to have a tattoo. You could probably make a strong guess. Who do you think?
I'm gonna say George W. Bush.
Maybe. I don't know when this was written, so some of the later presidents might have had it. Teddy Roosevelt was sure to have one. Two others who are suspected of having one were Andrew Jackson and FDR. Jackson, I'm almost certain, would have like some straight up demonic shit on him, or like the red dragon, like back
jungle
piece.
fever or something, like for life.
Nah, I'm thinking he's like a serial killer.
That could be.
Because he was a fucking psycho.
There's just tally marks, like...
Right. And so, bringing me kind of to the long last point here, removal. While laser removal is only about 40 years old, people attempting to erase or cover tattoos are much older. Some procedures date back as far as the 6th century from Alexandria and Constantinople with a doctor named Aetius, and most likely there were efforts even before that. How successful they were, probably not great. Most people looking for their tattoos to be removed in Aetius' time were soldiers.
Sorry, I can't get it. Dr. Aetius just sounds like a house DJ.
Yeah, that's actually my solo music venture. But like soldiers who were marked to, like, they would be marked to prevent desertion, or there would be slaves who were marked either for the crimes that led to their enslavement or a punishment for some behavior after that. So like these were tattoos that literally would say shit like, stop me, I'm a runaway. Yeah. And you know, if I saw somebody with a tattoo like that, I would definitely not stop them. Like, I don't know who all these like people are like, I gotta help the law.
Right.
Like, we don't have that. It's not even like a moral thing, because you got to imagine like slavery was the norm and nobody thought anything about it. But you have to imagine nobody just saw that tattoo and was like, wait a minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like seeing a picture of the guy that just robbed the bank, and then the guy, you realize he's standing in front of you at the convenience store. Most of us aren't going to be like, you, sir.
Right.
Halt.
It has to be like a really terrible crime for people for like a civilian to take action.
Or I have to have a guaranteed sucker punch that I can get off. Like something like that. Because
well, I think we talked about it with, what's his face? Richard Ramirez. Or one of the serial killers. It might have been Ramirez. But he just got completely ganged up on by an entire neighborhood and they beat the piss out of him.
Yeah,
so like do something like that. Like somebody trying to run away as a slave, like you wouldn't do much.
Imagine these tattoos were somewhere prominent, like their face or something too, where they couldn't cover them up very easily without looking suspicious.
I probably imagine they tried shit before tattoos where they would just like put them in a barrel with like suspenders and just like put a sign on the front. So yeah, like in his time, while tattoos sometimes were for like sacred purposes with like priests and stuff, most tattoos usually were a mark of somebody who were under the control of someone, which is pretty funny now when you consider like what tattoos represent in 2018. where it's like it's often a very like kind of individual
anti-establishment,
individually kind of empowering. You know, like for the most part, most companies now don't care if you have tattoos, but there are still like those snooty fucks who will be like, well, wear sleeves.
The job, like,
yeah,
it is hard to imagine like a high-end like legal prosecutor or defense attorney that's got like a full face like tattoo. Like,
that's a man who knows the fucking law. That's who you want to be your fucking legal attorney, man. Yeah, but I think a lot of that's kind of going away over time. So what Aetius would do to try to remove a tattoo is he would basically smear them with like a resin, and he said like if you bandage it for 5 days, eventually it would be removed in like 20 without any sort of ulceration or scar. He had a foolproof method, except nobody ever seemed to use this method later on, so obviously it probably didn't fucking work.
I imagine all it did was dye the rest of the skin a big splotch the same color as the tattoo. Be like, ta-da!
Yeah, something. It doesn't really say what the results actually were, but you have to imagine like whatever it did, it was probably for like smaller markings that wouldn't be seen often anyway, and then it would just be enough sort of like, well, it doesn't say I'm a soldier, it's just a weird fucking mark on me.
Right.
But in the 17th and 18th century, hopes for removal were much more desperate and probably even less successful. European countries would often just try to cut the tattoo out, usually leaving the tattoos and adding some pretty vicious scarring.
Or you like just end up with a scar the exact shape and like pattern of the tattoo because they cut too like specifically.
Right. You know, it's well, you're either lopping off a huge chunk of flesh or you're just doubling down.
That's the thing. You'd have to go like down to the tissue layer, and then at that point you just got a giant hole in your flesh.
Right.
They didn't. I don't. To my knowledge, they didn't have skin grafting. So
yeah, 18th century skin grafting. I don't want to think about the infection rate. But, you know, like we kind of talked about, like a lot of these societies were very, you know, religious. It was a like real impurity to be marked. But a lot of times there were situations where people were getting marked, if not against their will, but kind of forced into a circumstance where they had to. So, right. Like, for example, there was a man, Gonzalo Guerrero, who was shipwrecked in Yucatan in 1511, and to survive, he joined the Maya. And they, you know, once you're a part of them, you know, they started fucking marking him up and giving him piercings. And after a while, a Spanish envoy finally found him. And he supposedly told the guy, like, I'm married and I have 3 children. They see me as a lord and captain now. He said, go yourself with God, for my face is tattooed and my ears are pierced. What will those Spaniards say of me if they see me like this? So there was like a real
So he
fear.
refused like salvation based on his look.
Yeah,
like,
he just
not salvation, that's the wrong word, but refused like getting back to his actual like
life. Yeah, he just completely jumped to a completely new culture.
Now that's his story. What it really was is there was some hot young Mayan that he like, you know, side piece he picked up, and he's like, fuck, I can't go back to my wife.
Well, I'm not sure if when he said he was married and has 3 children, I don't know if he had them with the Mayans or...
Oh, good point.
Like, you know, it didn't really give the context, so maybe he's like, look, I got a fucking family now. I can't bolt, and you guys would just make fun of me, so fuck you.
Well, it's true, though, and that's... I mean, we think of it, we were just kind of talking about, a little joking about, but like how people with tattoos today are still kind of... not kind of, but very much discriminated against in certain circumstances, at least.
Right.
Back then, you got to imagine how much worse that would be. Can you imagine walking into like a Catholic church with your full face?
Like people, like they, it wasn't often. There were other stories kind of in the articles I read, and those links will be up when we put the show up. But there were some stories about like guys who. The tattoos themselves wouldn't get them in trouble with like the church or authorities, but they would be a good excuse if they already had a problem with you. Like they would arrest you and say like you're branded by heretics or some shit.
No giant establishment has ever decided to single somebody out unjustly, though. Like in the history of
that's not happening like right as we're recording this show right now. But yeah, that's some tattoo trivia for you. Tattoos are very neat. They don't hurt nearly as much, and they are a long, interesting part of history.
Well, I saw pictures of yours, and I started to say, jealous is the wrong word because I still don't think.
But they're
I've always said if I got in shape, I like the big the shoulder tattoo, kind of like the one that
The Rock
has, yeah, but not like tribal because I'm way too white for a tribal.
You
tattoo.
should. I would love if you got that tattoo in the shape you're in now.
No, that's the thing. You can't have one like that and be a short, fat, out of shape guy because that's just ridiculous. That's like a tough guy tattoo. But I like your tattoo. That's the kind of thing that I would get if I were to get one.
Yeah, and as a first tattoo, like a rune or something simple like that. It took
you tend to don't want to jump right into the full back tattoo.
Yeah, this one took 40 minutes maybe, and that's with the dude insisting that he had a smoke break before we got started. So, and they, it was cool. It was a very relaxed experience. So it was fun.
Well, cool. Yeah, like I said, I like it. So check Ben out on Twitter to see it if you'd like.
Yeah, you
or
want
don't.
some?
I don't really care.
Just check me out on Twitter. I'm fun. I'm a cool guy.
All right, so I've got something completely different. Picture New York City in 1950. Crowded sidewalks and busy streets crammed between a maze of towering skyscrapers. People doing the Chattanooga choo-choo or the jitter or whatever the hell they did in the 50s.
Mad Men theme playing.
Yeah. So apparently when Rudolph Fentz suddenly appeared on the streets of New York City, everybody was too busy doing their New York stuff to notice a man just materializing out of thin air.
Send in your favorite New York stuff.
For his part, Rudolph seemed confused by the scene before him. He looked around in astonishment first and then in panic, and then suddenly took off like a bolt. Then blammo, he was struck and killed by a passing vehicle. So now in 1950,
Come back next week.
So in 1950, I imagine it wasn't unusual for a pedestrian to get run down while trying to cross a busy road. I've actually listened to some really interesting podcasts talking about crosswalks and street laws and that kind of stuff. And at one point, it was pretty much just every man for themselves.
Yeah. As somebody who walks everywhere, there is a little bit of daredevil element to it.
That's what I was going to say. I assume it's still a common occurrence.
It's actually really nerve-wracking to go to this tattoo place because I had never been there before. I wanted to check it out before I made an appointment or anything. To get to that part of town, the crosswalks are completely different than how they are in my normal day-to-day. The buttons are different. The fucking things beep at you until it's time to go. And then a voice tells you to go, and it's really weird.
We've got one crosswalk in our town, I think, maybe two, that do the chirping thing, but not the others. So that's really disorienting. So,
yeah.
I know what they're for. I've seen them before, but anytime you hear it, you're still like, what the fuck is that? Oh, yeah, the crosswalk.
Right.
And that reminds me, too, I was just talking about it yesterday because we were aware. I don't know if you're, blind. I know that's what it's for, or visually impaired, or whatever. Maybe not completely blind, but even, people that are. It helps you know when it says walk. But how the fuck do you know which of the two directions it means walk for? I don't know. So anyway,
I don't know. Maybe I've been told to walk and almost hit anyway enough times that it's the walk is more of a suggestion. You still have to really pay attention to traffic. Right.
That's where the smart dogs come in handy.
Right.
But anyway. So, I said, I imagine it wasn't unusual for a pedestrian to get run down in 1950s New York City. But what made the case of Rudolph Fentz's death so mysterious, aside from him apparently having just appeared in the middle of the city, was that from his clothes to his big bushy mutton chop sideburns, Fentz was dressed as if he had just stepped out of the 1800s. When police examined the body, aside from his antiquated clothing, they found some business cards with his name on it and a local address for his office, a receipt for a horse and carriage livery, old banknotes, and a letter postmarked from 1876 originating out of Philadelphia, sent to the same address that was on his business cards, and also a copper beer token belonging to a local saloon. So, an interesting... It's kind of like the Tam and Shud case from a few weeks ago, where it's mysterious dead guy and a bunch of weird stuff on his person.
Right.
When they investigated the location listed on the business cards, they did find that the building was certainly an office building and there was a business there, but nobody there had ever heard of Rudolph Fentz. They tried the saloon, but it didn't seem to exist, and nor did the horse and carriage livery listed on the receipt, but, it's 1950. Where the fuck would you find a horse and carriage livery? They were able to find that the bank that had issued the outdated banknotes was local as well, and the bank was able to trace it back to an account under the name of one Rudolph Fentz Jr. So finally the clues seemed to be coming together.
It was a Twilight Zone episode all along.
So they did find the bank account. However, that account had been closed 5 years prior. The bank was able to give the police the address listed on the account, so of course that was their next stop. When they reached the home, they were greeted by Mr. Fentz's wife, and they asked about the husband, Rudolph Fentz, hoping to find out why he had taken such elaborate steps to dress up in, authentic old-timey clothes and stuff his pocket with this, random old-timey junk, and then step into traffic. Unfortunately, instead, they were told that her husband, Rudolph Fentz Jr., had died 5 years earlier, and that the man that had been struck down in the street couldn't possibly have been him. So they're kind of back to square one. But then she went on to explain that Rudolph shared the same name as his father, of course, hence the Jr. at the end. That's how names work. And she recalled stories being told of how in 1876, at the age of 29, Rudolph Sr. mysteriously disappeared, and no one knew where he went or what happened to him. The police were baffled. All they knew is they apparently had a man that had disappeared from his home some 70 years prior, only to reappear downtown before freaking out and running into the street and being run down by a car.
The DeLorean.
Pretty much. That's what the story of Rudolph Fentz quickly became one of the best-known instances of what scientists call unintentional time travel.
Bullshit.
Exactly.
My God. That's unintentional whoopsie-daisy time travel.
I fucking hate that when you're just walking to the store and all of a sudden you're in 3027 and there's just cars zipping overhead and you're like, what the fuck?
I know, right? You're getting up to go to work. You're getting up to go to work. Next thing you know, it's midnight. You have diarrhea. What the fuck?
So other theories came out and they suggest that the man in the street was not Rudolph Fentz Sr., and that the widow's, instead of being the widow's father-in-law, it was actually her husband, Rudolph Jr. They theorize instead of dying like she thought, he actually faked his own death by some means and ran away from home.
And then time traveled. Brilliant.
Ta-da. Is it perhaps on drugs or perhaps due to mental illness? He then took on the persona of his missing father, and spiraling into madness in a cloud of confusion, he stepped into the street and was promptly hit.
This sounds probably like a lame-ass Batman villain.
I am not me, I am my father.
I'm the out-of-time man.
So that's probably a more credible theory than the time travel, except for if Rudolph Fentz Sr. disappeared in 1876, the youngest Junior could have possibly been in 1950 would be 74 years old. So you'd think, if there was any confusion about which Fentz it was, you could tell the difference between a 30-year-old time traveler and a 74-year-old senile man. Although the age of the man was never discussed when he was killed, so it's really impossible to say which theory is right, that he was a time traveler or senile old man, except for the fact that time travel doesn't fucking exist. The actual correct answer to the theory is that neither of those are correct, because, like I said, time traveling doesn't exist, and Junior didn't die in the street. The wife kind of knew that her husband was dead. It wasn't like a mysterious death by any means.
Yeah, you morons. It was obviously cloning. God,
duh.
Think about shit.
So, turns out the entire account of Rudolph Fentz is taken directly from a science fiction story written by one Jack Finney, published in 1951. But a few years after it was published, the story was reproduced by a Ralph Holland. When Holland published the story as part of a booklet, he also went in and removed any and all indication that it was a work of fiction. Because as it turns out, Holland was a member of a ridiculous group called Borderland that among their core beliefs was there was an existence of a mysterious fourth dimension. So,
see, I was going to say, like, that would actually be a really great work of fiction to present it as a complete, like, factual news story.
Right. And that's pretty much how... Now, if you read it, he took some liberties on the story. He basically stole the story, but, like all artists do, where it's like, I changed the name and the location. Ha-ha! But, yeah, it's actually, like, it reads as a very, like, Ray Bradbury-esque short story, and that's what it was, a short story. It was published in a magazine, you know, like, back in the 50s, how they had the you know, fiction magazines. It was, like, a single-page or double-page article. Yeah. And it's a really good, like, short story. If you're reading sci-fi and you think, you know, what would happen if you suddenly, like, just blipped into like almost 100 years in the future and freaked out and something instantly killed you because you didn't know what the fuck was going on. Like,
right.
I get it. Yeah. And that's why I laughed when you said Twilight Zone. Yeah, it would be a great
and in fact, I'm sure something similar happened.
Probably, because sci-fi all just builds off of each other.
And Twilight Zone had like fucking 20 seasons or some shit. Like,
and it's coming back. So even if they haven't yet, there's definitely going to steal it.
I'm sure it'll suck because I'm a pessimist.
But anyway, so Holland, of course, used the story in his booklet for the Borderlands and used it as proof of unwitting time travel because that definitely sounds extra-dimensional.
Right.
And then what happened is over time, as the booklet and the story began like making the paranormal research rounds, and I put research in in quotes, of course, because if you've been around, I don't know, we have talked about it too much on the show, although we have because we've talked about paranormal topics. But yeah, I'm definitely going to patronize like paranormal people because until you fucking prove something, it's all just crap anyway. But out of all places, you know, it starts making the rounds through these paranormal groups, and it, like, out of everywhere, it really started to like take hold in Europe for some reason. Probably because that even adds to the mystique, where it's like, this thing happened over in New York. Did you hear about it? And
well, it turns out they're way into Doctor Who, so like,
right,
anything that gets them closer to that world.
I hope it was the Fifth Doctor. I fucking hated that one. He can get run over all he wants. I don't know. The Fifth Doctor might be the... I know shit about Doctor Who.
I just know there's a lot of doctors. Mm-hmm. And I don't know and I don't know who they are.
Doctor Who?
And the podcast just cuts off there, never to be seen again.
Well, at least everybody listening cut it off there. But, so, like many such tales, like the further we are removed from the original source and the longer the story gets passed around, it starts to kind of become oral tradition. And these groups just kind of accept it as fact that this is the thing that really happened. So to this day, the story of Rudolph Fentz remains a case that's often cited as proof of time travel through these paranormal groups.
And it started with a book.
Not even a book, like a 2-page like short story in a completely branded as sci-fi,
like plagiarized short story.
Story, right? Which of course he didn't like cite it or anything. He just put it in his. Apparently, if you're making up a wackadoo like pamphlet for your group, you can just steal whatever you want and misrepresent it because
that's actually not a bad idea. I got a lot of great horror books on my shelf that will make the world a lot more interesting once I present them as fact.
You may or may not live to see the day, but eventually 100 years down the road, people will be like, look, this was in a publication 100 years ago. It happened.
Yeah, come back next week when I talk about a clown who can take the shape of all your fears in Maine. This is a real thing.
We all defy gravity down in this place.
And I don't know why the cops won't do anything about it.
But, so I don't normally do this for sanity's sake, but I ventured into the comments section of one of these articles, and the article was on like one of these not even really a debunking but a webpage that presented it exactly how I did. They're like, here's the story of this time traveler. It's not true. Here's, the article and where it came from.
Right.
But I decided to read some of the comments, and of course all the comments are these people that believe in this story. So I had to like actually go ahead and write some down because I just feel like yelling at people that are idiots.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you're I've had a long week, but I'm glad you're pulling me into this ride.
Literally, the very first commenter bemoans the debunking of the story, saying that it far from proves the case that the time-traveling Rudolph isn't real. Just because there's a story that reads exactly like it in a sci-fi publication, that doesn't prove that it didn't happen.
Well, it predates what happened, is the point. It means it happened before that, which means the story isn't fucking
I'll get to
credible.
That too. The next one. But, I mean, finding a beat-for-beat story in a sci-fi publication seems pretty ironclad to me, but I guess technically it doesn't mean it didn't happen. I mean, that's like the people that say, prove that Bigfoot doesn't exist. Like, well, I can't. Right. But that's not the point. Like,
right.
You also haven't proven that he does.
Yeah, I'm pretty content at this point in my life to let people believe what they want to believe as long as they're not. Because we've talked about, like, Bigfoot and other supernatural stuff before, it's really, if that makes life more entertaining for you, then have at it. As long as you're not, like, telling people, like, your house is haunted, you have to destroy it, or some bullshit like that. Well,
that's what my problem is with something like Bigfoot, is that it's easy to say that. It's like, it's not hurting them. If they want to believe, fine. But then I find out that there's these actual people running around the fucking woods with assault rifles because they're hunting Bigfoot. And it's like, no.
Well, yeah.
Quit shooting at anything that moves at night, because that's not how you do it with guns. Like,
and those are, like, exceptional fuckers, because, like, you are so much of a psychopath about killing shit. You want to kill something that's not real. Like, you actually want to hunt a fake thing you made up.
Or even if it does turn out to be real, your first thought is, let's kill it.
Right.
Like, it obviously hasn't harmed anybody in ever because we don't have proof, but we're going to kill it.
Oh, it threw pebbles at my wife. Shoot it.
You, sir, have insulted my honor.
That's every hunting Bigfoot show is like, hey, he shoved my tent once when I was sleeping. I got pissed.
Anyway. So I guess that person has a point in that the sci-fi publication existing doesn't in and of itself prove that it didn't happen. But it's interesting to me that you would say, well, yeah, the story really could have happened, and instead of anybody involved writing and discussing about it, like a newspaper or a police report or anything, it didn't become this huge story. Instead, it really happened, but the only person to ever discuss it decided to put it in the form of a sci-fi story and publish it in a sci-fi magazine. It's like, if you want to believe that that's the most, like, probable answer, I guess. I don't agree with you. Another commenter smugly points out that it's funny to debunk the story, since the time traveler showed up in New York in 1950, but the story wasn't published in the sci-fi magazine until 1951. So how could it be fake if the fictional events took place in the past, Janet? Like, it's funny watching these comments where it's like, I've got proof that you say that it was all a fake story, but the fake story happened after the time traveler showed up. It's like, but the point is, the time traveler didn't show up. Like, it didn't happen.
If what I'm saying is correct, then then the time travel is not a thing.
That's like saying, like, how did Herman Melville write about Moby Dick if it happened 100 years before he wrote it? How is that a fake story? Which is a bad example, because it's at least technically somewhat based on an actual story.
Off of factual shit that could happen.
Right. Yeah. And then there's the guy bitching that there's a news article that came out 5 months prior to the fictional story, which is linked right on their Wikipedia page. Person that wrote this article, if you even did any kind of investigation,
I like your
you would know
snooty,
that.
Like, mad commenter voice.
Well, you know that's how they write it.
Mr. Writer of article.
And that would be a compelling argument to say, well, wait a minute, there was an article in the news that talked about this prior to the fake story coming out. Except for, he points out that it's right on the Wikipedia page, and the literal line on Wikipedia says, it has been suggested that a news article dated April reported the story, with no actual, like, citation or links to the news article. And then that very same line continues on to say, furthermore, the supposed story by Finney has yet to be found. But literally a quarter inch below that on the page is a link to the original story by Finney. So obviously whatever editor added that line in, like, oh, the mystery continues, it's like, no, Like, this whole line is bullshit. And it's right fucking there. So anyway, aside from the idiocy and this for over like almost 70 years now being presented as fact by groups of people that just want to believe it, I just found it like an interesting, it was on a hoax website, but it's not a hoax if you write it intending it to be fake. I guess the hoax you could say was on the guy that stole it and presented.
The hoax was the plagiarist.
So aside from the stupidity of all that, I came across this and I'm like, it is kind of a cool, like you said, it's a neat sci-fi story. It's very Twilight Zone-y. I've always been a huge fan of like Ray Bradbury's short story stuff. I've never been real into his like, I mean, I like his long form stuff, but I haven't read it like I've read his short stories, and it comes across as that. Like, it's a cool little science fiction story.
And even in that like framework of, like, if the dude made it, like I said, if he made it written in that style of like this actually happened, but it is like a clear work of fiction to be treated as such, like I would have no problem with that either. It's, you know, it's the fact that we're actually having that people are commenting and arguing about whether or not unintentional time travel happened is just really, really fucking silly.
Right.
Like, but it's like all life is trying to find ways to amuse ourselves and entertain ourselves until
and it
we're
would be
done.
Close-minded to say that, you know, fantastic things can't happen and don't exist.
And don't happen,
but that's a long stretch from saying something like this. You could even argue, oh, it could happen, quantum physics. And it's like, well, technically.
Right, but, you know, there's like saying, like, an incredible thing happened, and then they're saying Abe Lincoln popped into our time and fell into a volcano immediately. Like... You know, it just,
and then saying it's definite, and if you refute that, you're an asshole that just hates reality. You're being taken by the man.
Well, you didn't debunk it. It's like that's.
I would be like the first one, super fucking excited if they proved aliens or Bigfoot, but you have to prove it first.
Yeah. But maybe that's just, you know, one more way people pass the time on this fucking cold rock is just. In fact, I know it is, because how long has, like, the internet seems like it's mostly revolved around a fucking religion debate that has been useless to humankind since the inception of the internet. And, like, you go to, like, people who, like, they are still having the same argument for, like, 20 years of their life. And that's, like, the same, like, well, you can't debunk it. Well, you can't prove that. And it's like, you guys are all fucking miserable people.
Yeah, I still have an account, but I almost never go there. But there's a science, astronomy mostly, but it's a forum, and they talk about all sciences, but it's astronomy focused. But they had a whole section on, like, debunking, because when you're an astronomy forum, and they had actual people, like one of the guys that posts there occasionally, I don't know if he still does, because I haven't been a regular visitor there for a long time, but he's a Apollo mission expert, you know. That's what he's studied. He was actually part of the Mythbusters episode where they were talking about, like, could you fake the moon footage, and, you know, that kind of stuff.
Right.
So whenever you're a community like that, it certainly draws in the other side of that, the people that come there to tell you it was faked and here's the proof. So there was always all that, like, debunking going on, you know, the back and forth, and it's funny how often the hoaxer type crowd would present just flimsy ass evidence, and then you could just throw science at it all day long, but they're never going to.
It's because
you're not going to change those people's mind, and
because there's nothing for them to gain, like, in their minds, out of being like, oh, okay, that's true. Like, for them, it is way more entertaining. Their world.
It makes the world more becomes an interesting place to.
Yeah, if we have a system of, like, we could fake something incredible like that, then imagine all the other strings we could pull.
You know, the weird thing there to me is it's a little depressing that they're like, oh, well, that's more interesting than accepting the fact that we actually fucking managed to land people on the moon and get them back safely, which...
But the truth is that something incredible like that only happens if a lot of people are willing to do really boring work.
Right.
Like,
but anyway, my point is that it's exactly what we said before, because it would often come up that these people would get there and they'd make their arguments, you shoot them down and say, oh yeah, well now it's your turn, prove that it did that it wasn't a hoax. And they'd flatly point out, because they're very intellectual, or at least a lot of them were very intellectual people. You say, well, you can't prove a negative. You just can't. That's a bad argument. There's an actual term for it in debate, and I can't think of it because I'm not an intellectual person. But I mean, the one that I would always liken it to is, oh, this car just sped by and I couldn't see the driver. Prove to me that it wasn't Bigfoot. It's like, well, you can't, because you didn't see the driver. You can't. Yeah. Prove, what could have been Richard Nixon's ghost that just drove by. I don't know. You didn't see him.
All right.
But so that's where a lot of this stuff comes from. But you throw away all of that. I still thought it was a really cool sci-fi story.
I love the idea of some 1800s dipshit being flung into our world and immediately paying the price for panicking.
And that part I like, and then the part about the people that have to respond to it, being like, "What the fuck? This dude's got mutton chops."
And that's and you could tell they didn't really travel much in the 1800s, because if you've traveled at all, you know if you're thrown into a fucking completely unfamiliar environment, you play it off, you just slowly saunter into a restaurant or whatever.
I like the idea of the investigators being so incompetent that they have to actually go and look to see if this horse and carriage livery still exists in the town that they patrol every day.
Well, it's clear. He has one of those bikes where the front wheel is really big and the back wheels are really small. He must be from the past.
Yeah. And that's the other thing that I like about this, making it a great sci-fi story and a horrible thing to try to convince people actually happened, is that at the end of the day, the investigators were like, "Oh, we talked to the husband disappeared. He must have time traveled."
Yeah, it's weird. It's one of those old timey bikes, but there's just a fucking engine attached to it, and hot rod decals on it. It's like, wow,
yeah, what's this Nike logo doing here?
This thing went so fast. He blasted him to our time.
And it's, it is a compelling, we've had that story in sci-fi before, not usually as that's the other thing I love about it, is it being an unwitting, this wasn't some inventor that was fucking around trying to time travel. The premise was that he just, if I didn't read through the full actual story because it was a PDF and it was being a pain in the ass to pull it up to a readable size, but I could scan it a little bit, and it's not written like a news article. So he didn't do it that way, although that would have been a cool approach. It's written very much like a sci-fi story, but it's talking about this guy I think he was writing a letter or something, from what I could discuss, how he could kind of feel that time was unraveling around him, and he was losing his grasp on it, and that something was going to happen.
That's
and then
just
suddenly,
an H.P. Lovecraft story.
Pretty much. Like I said, it's a mix between Bradbury or Love. It almost had Edgar Allan Poe undertones, except for, it had if Poe was a slightly more modern day horror writer or something.
I think we've all experienced unintentional time travel when we've been drunk and
drinking.
Somebody had a trampoline, and then you just you go a little too hard. Next thing you know, wormhole. Yeah.
All I remember is the sensation that I was flying through the air, and then I didn't wake up. Next thing I knew, it was Wednesday, and I had a broken arm. Mystery.
I don't think there's been a time where alcohol and a trampoline's been involved where I didn't fly off it and land hard on the ground.
I can't stay on them when I'm sober, so yeah.
Yeah, I used to play on them a lot as a kid, but had a neighbor who had one. But
yeah, one of my best friends growing up, his dad was, and I didn't know this was the thing until we became friends, which we worked for a long time. But he was a professional trampoline instructor at one point. Trampolining used to be, and I don't think it still is, but an Olympic sport.
Yeah,
and that's what he did for a college somewhere. Now he didn't do that by the time we knew the family, but they had one of those full-size Olympic, the big square gymnastic trampolines. So yeah, that was always a very common draw for us and then other neighborhood kids.
See, and then alcohol enters the picture in my later life, and it's I can't walk, and I'm gonna try to do a front flip,
yeah.
It's like, I've courted death so many times now when I look back on my life.
Yeah. Well, like I say, when I say I never used to, I never trusted myself even when I was like 8 and still like, your bones are still flexible at that point. But it's like, I know how clumsy and uncoordinated I am. I'm not a fan of trampolines. I never was, but everybody else was. So it was usually them trying to kill each other on the trampoline while I kind of like didn't get on the trampoline.
Poor boy Steve.
Nope, I don't miss it. I mean, to this day, I hate trampolines. I think they're the most like unnecessarily like dangerous things.
I just imagine you like arms folded, just little child Steve. Like, I hate fun.
That's a bad idea, guys. Somebody's gonna poke an eye out.
Your bones are gonna not be flexible someday, and you're gonna wish you listened to me.
There was broken bones on it at least once. I wasn't there for that though.
Oh.
But you know, the game that you always do where you talk the one like irrationally trusting kid to like sit down in the middle of the trampoline, and then you have two people jump as high as they can and land right next to them.
That's
to see how high.
Yeah, I never liked that shit. It was like, I have to trust you guys not to just land on me. Fuck you.
Right, and not only not land on you, but not shoot you into them, or if they don't land at roughly the same time, shoot you off at some weird angle.
I had a cousin. I don't know relatives very well, but he was a kid about my age, and he had one of those trampolines with like the cage around it, and they did that shit, and I fucking flung my head into the pole, and it fucking hurt. And I was like, why did we do that? Why is there a cage here? Like, it doesn't make this safer. It turns
into a cage match. I could never figure out which was worse, getting flung all the way off of a trampoline or getting flung into the springs. Like,
right, like, at least I can, like, brace myself for impact if I fly off and hit the ground. Like, I can't, like, this is just a, like, 1-2 right into, like, it would be the same as just, like, jumping into a wall. Like,
yeah.
Fuck all that. Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know, you know, Rudolph Fentz time traveled in a fictitious story. He did not invent trampolining. For what we know, though, he might have done some trampolining in his time. I don't know when
the trampoline came about.
Yeah. Maybe I'll plagiarize the story too, and I'll change it just slightly, where he appears in New York City on a trampoline and just gets like bounced into traffic.
He swaps places with me, hits his head on the pole, and dies.
Yeah. So that's what I got this week. It is what it is. Like, it's one of those where I have to try to tell the whole story and the premise that it's true, and then do that. Ha ha! No, except for there's no way to fucking sell time travel. Right.
You know, like, we solved this problem, I think, in the first part, where it's like, well, time travel's not a thing. There must be a real explanation.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out
I was trying to slip it in there. I knew there's no way to do that. No.
Well, maybe next time you can.
That's why I added the line, what scientists call. And it's like, yeah, no, they don't. Not real scientists.
That's maybe next week there will be a mystery. Come back next week for a non-essential podcast. Yeah. Goodbye.
Yeah. Goodbye.